So it goes without saying that everything about horror video games are designed with the intention of putting players' nerves on the absolute edge as they work their way through whatever terrors the developers have in store. It makes sense then that the bosses in these games will take what are already stressful encounters and elevate them to a whole new level of intensity. However, not all horror bosses are satisfying to fight, and that's what we're here to talk about today. As I'm Jules, this is WhatCulture.com, and these are the 10 most frustrating bosses in horror video games. Number 10. Jill Valentine, Resident Evil 5. With Chris Redfield returning to the spotlight, Resident Evil 5 saw the former STARS agent travel to West Africa, where he's then tasked with thwarting bioterrorist Ricardo Irving. Late into the game, however, it's revealed that Jill Valentine has been under the control of Albert Wesker. After the unveiling of this pivotal plot point, it's time for a boss fight against Wesker and Jill. Unfortunately, there's not much thrilling about this encounter. Firstly, all that needs to be done in the first stage is avoid Wesker for 7 minutes. It's an okay fight, and one that will push you to try and earn the special rewards by beating him in that 7 minutes, but it's the second part that really ramps up the frustration, because the goal now is to remove the mind control device from Jill's chest, but before Chris can remove it, he's got to catch her first. With Jill dashing around the arena at lightning speed, this portion of the fight becomes a prolonged game of cat and mouse as the player just runs after her, she moves, they run after her again, rinse, repeat. The difficulty comes not from the level of challenge here, but in hoping that she'll just bloody stay still long enough to initiate the QuickTime event. And moreover, the AI-controlled Sheva frequently getting in Chris's path does not help matters either. Number 9. The Wendigo, Until Dawn. Supermassive Games' choose-your-own-adventure horror affair Until Dawn is a loving tribute to the schlocky horror films of the early 2000s. It was the developers' flair for storytelling and gleeful handling of genre tropes which made this title so irresistible to horror fans, not to mention the emphasis on choice that made replaying essential to seeing everything this game had to offer. Split-second choices and quick-time events with life-or-death consequences was the primary way of maintaining a sense of urgency throughout the cinematic experience. But where this mechanic was the least successful, however, was in the final confrontation against the Wendigos that have been pursuing the cast of hormonal teens throughout its latter half. The fight plays out as a series of quick-time events where snappy decision-making is integral to success. While the suspense is palpable, the frustrations arise when the pivotal factor in who lives or dies rests on whether the controller is moved. At certain points where the game requires players to remain still, the slightest movement could result in one of the remaining survivors being brutally killed, potentially ruining an entire playthrough by sheer accident. Making matters worse, the only way to remedy this blunder is to replay the entire game. Ouch. Number 8. The Shambler, Call of Cthulhu. An adaptation of the Lovecraftian tabletop game of the same name, Call of Cthulhu is an enthralling blend of investigative detective work and cosmic horror, as it follows unfortunate protagonist Edward Pierce as he stumbles into a rabbit hole of cults and otherworldly horrors while investigating his latest case. The game is at its strongest when it presents players with its dark and brooding mystery. The emphasis on choice makes for a captivating and engaging experience as the unsettling truth is gradually unveiled. What the game is not, however, is a stealth game. Despite this, though, the developers nevertheless throw a handful of clumsy stealth sequences to break up the fun, none of which are as frustrating as the one involving the Shambler. When Pierce's search leads him to a private collection in the 6th chapter, the shadowy creature emerges from a creepy painting and begins its hunt for the detective. The objective is to sneak past the monster to find a special dagger in order to destroy the painting. But with no real stealth system, this section becomes an exercise in trial and error in just figuring out where and when it's best to hide from the creature while hoping it doesn't spot you immediately. Number 7. The Hunter, Dead Space. A claustrophobic and visceral sci-fi survival horror, part of what made Dead Space such a nerve-shredding experience was the ingenious method for defeating the nightmarish necromorphs. Unlike most games where a few bullets to the head would do the job, Dead Space required players to dismember their creatures' limbs instead, and with their erratic movements and scarce resources, this was not always an easy task. However, Dead Space broke its own rules when, in the 5th chapter, it introduced a new enemy in the form of the Hunter. Upon instinctively shooting off its razor-sharp limbs in sheer panic, players would just watch in horror as it regenerated its lost limbs and continued its pursuit. With no way to eliminate this enemy permanently, fighting the Hunter became a white-knuckled test of endurance in which the player's nerves are pushed to breaking point. The only way to succeed is to slow the brute down just long enough to make it to the next area. Swarms of ordinary necromorphs and movable objects amplified the anxiety to an almost unbearable level. The difficulty and tension were so intense here that it's understandable if you put down the controller for good. Number 6. The Super Tyrant, Resident Evil 2 Remake. The remake of Resident Evil 2 was much more than a fresh coat of paint. It was a complete overhaul of the survival horror classic that was faithful to the original while also introducing new ideas and reworking some old ones for series veterans. The gory, zombie-infested hallways of the RPD were an atmospheric and claustrophobic setting. Aiming, which encouraged a methodical approach to combat, elevated the tension of every encounter, and the return of the relentless Mr. X created some of the most nerve-wracking moments in the game, with his echoing footsteps signaling his unstoppable approach. Boss encounters were also part of the package. However, the slow-paced combat that was great for sustaining tension against hordes of shambling zombies didn't really translate as well when it came to these larger threats, with none being as frustrating than that climactic encounter with Mr. X. During this point, Leon or Claire must face the Tyrant one final time as they make their escape before the laboratory self-destructs. The stage is a small elevator platform scattered with fallen debris. With the purposefully slow controls making it difficult to avoid his punishing attacks, retrying this battle is almost a guarantee. And that one-hit kill blow that he does? Just no thank you. At least the rocket launcher makes for a cathartic final blow. Number 5. Scarlet, Silent Hill Homecoming. As well as being one of the pioneers of the survival horror genre, the Silent Hill series is best known for its chilling atmosphere and psychological plotlines, which gave its gruesome monsters a whole new layer of creepiness, with Pyramid Head psychosexual terror being a well-known example. Unfortunately, the series' quality would decline with the release of the later sequels. By the time that Homecoming, the 6th installment, launched in 2008, the magic and terror were all but gone, replaced instead by generic storytelling that played fast and loose with its own lore and a protagonist, Alex, a war veteran whose combat experience took the tension and challenge away from fighting monsters. And another misfire came in the form of the boss fight against Scarlet. The second boss faced in the game, Scarlet is the guilt of a murderous doctor manifested into the form of a grotesque spidery mannequin. She's an intimidating presence, but fighting her is daunting for all the wrong reasons. After a clunky brawl involving dodging her slow attacks, the boss deploys a new move in the second phase in which she drops down from the ceiling. With such a short window to evade this ambush, numerous retries are inevitable for those not expecting this super cheap attack. Number 4. Thomas, Deadly Premonition. Deadly Premonition is to video games what The Room is to cinema. Helmed by Japanese developer Hidetaka Suehiro, aka Swery, the Twin Peaks-like whodunit is so ludicrous in its insanity and eccentricities that it must be seen to be believed. It's so bad it's good in the best possible way, with its oddities, ensemble cast of bizarre characters, and jarring animations making for a hilarious time. However, Deadly Premonition is not always a fun game to play. Awkward tank controls, clunky aiming, and a splattering of unintuitive mechanics was the price to pay to experience this cult gem, and nowhere are these games' blemishes most noticeable than in the boss fight against Thomas, the town's timid deputy sheriff. The battle is as simple as it gets. Thomas jumps between a set of rotating gears, occasionally making attacks which can be evaded with a simple QuickTime event. All that needs to be done is to shoot him until his health bar reaches 0. However, this is easier said than done. The horrendous over-the-shoulder aiming combined with the most awkward camera angles mean that players will be fighting the controls more than the boss itself. Thankfully, the director's cut remedied the combat issues with this, which meant that the fight became an absolute breeze. But still, the original one, woof. Number 3. The Keeper, The Evil Within. The Evil Within was populated with hordes of monstrous creatures, with bosses like our spidery Laura and the chainsaw-wielding sadist forever holding a place in our nightmares. But none of these enemies are as memorable or formidable as the Keeper. Dressed in a butcher's apron with a safe for a head, this hulking monstrosity torments grizzled detective Sebastian throughout the 7th chapter of the game. It's evident that a boss fight with the Keeper is on the cards at the end of the chapter, which proved to be one of the most difficult sections of the game, but not for all the right reasons. When the Keeper ominously arrives at the climactic moment, the goal is to escape from the chamber that they've trapped Sebastian in. It's already a tough fight thanks to the Keeper's traps and relentless brutality, but unlike most bosses, the Keeper has a nasty habit of resurrecting a few moments after being downed. Moreover, a poisonous gas is also slowly filling the arena, which adds extra pressure by way of a time limit. Combined with the prolonged time it takes to operate the valves needed to escape, it's easy to see why this fight is so frustratingly difficult. Number 2. The Mermaid Princess, Rule of Rose. Since its release in 2006, Japanese survival horror Rule of Rose has since become one of the most underappreciated and controversial titles of the PS2 era. The plot follows the struggles of a 19-year-old called Jennifer, who is dealing with a sadistic group of orphan girls who call themselves the Red Crayon Aristocrat Club. Alongside their faithful canine companion Brown, each chapter sees the teenager search for a gift to appease each of the orphans. While Rule of Rose was praised for its atmospheric storytelling and handling of disturbing subject matter, the combat was nothing short of awful. Clunky controls and imprecise movement meant that it was difficult to tell if Jennifer's half-hearted attacks would actually even connect with enemies. But no moment in the game drew as much attention to just how horrible the controls were than the boss fight against the mermaid princess. A sickly girl dressed as a mermaid dangling from the ceiling, this boss will drop down and attack Jennifer at random by flailing her arms and vomiting all over her. But with no way to tell where she'll appear or if any of the attacks are going to hit, this fight becomes a test of endurance, but the only viable strategy is to just cross your fingers and hope for the best. And number 1, Jason, Friday the 13th for the NES. Video games that tie into movies have a reputation for being astonishingly awful. Aside from the notorious E.T. game for Atari, which was so bad it almost caused the collapse of the video game industry forever, another reason for this reputation is thanks to the likes of Friday the 13th for the NES. Based on the slasher films of the same name, the game sees the player take control of a group of camp counselors who must defeat the hockey mask-wearing killer before they slaughter everyone at camp. When Jason does attack, an alarm sounds, and the player must rush to the besieged cabin before a counselor or campers meet their grisly end. If navigating the unintuitive map, battling unruly controls, or trying to steer around badly rendered cabin interiors wasn't a big enough exercise in frustration, fighting Jason managed to be so much worse. These fights unfold as a boxing match between an adversary who hits hard, moves fast, and who's difficult to dodge thanks to unintuitive controls. However, that's not the most aggravating thing about this boss, and that comes from the fact that Jason will arrive to attack players randomly while exploring. Moreover, his ambushes can happen in quick succession, meaning a pretty quick death for whichever unlucky counselor encounters him. Great fun. And there we go, my friends. Those were 10 of the most frustrating bosses in horror video games. I hope that you enjoyed that, and please let me know what you thought about it down in the comments section below. As always, I've been Jules. You can go follow me over on Twitter at RetroJ, but the O is a 0. Hope to see you over there. As always, I've been Jules. You have been awesome. Never forget that, and I'll speak to you soon.